Guys, anyone who's followed me, watched my content, listened to any of these past podcasts, really anything that I put out over the last 24, 36 months know that I'm a big fan of Nic. So Nic, thank you for taking a few minutes sitting down to chat with me today. I know we've hashed all this stuff out before, but I think it's always good to revisit some of this stuff. And especially like, you asked me, let's just be candid with the audience, right? You asked me on Thursday or Friday or even Wednesday, midweek last week, you were like, hey, if you were to join a podcast, what were some of the things that you would love to cover if you were me, right? You were asking from your perspective, because I know you have some podcast recordings coming up. And I started to jot down some notes, and I thought, wow, I've got all these questions that I would ask him. Why don't I just ask him? And forgive me, but I I front ran your your other shows here.
Hey, you're my best friend. It starts with you. So you get
So
first mover advantage.
yeah, I decided instead of provide the questions that or some ideas for these shows, I might as well just ask them myself. So that's fun for me. So I'm glad, and especially on a Monday morning. Thank you for taking some time.
Absolutely. We're great to be here with you.
I want to talk clients and prospects and get your perspective, of their perspective, frankly. And then I want to get into the industry a little bit and understand a little bit about where your head's at regarding the financial advisor industry as a whole. And then maybe we can even dig into some of the stuff on the financial side as well. So with that, you're co-founder of Know My Plan. You've got a nice 3-person team. You've built a nice business. You guys are successful by all metrics. How are things going?
Things are going great. It's probably I've never had more fun that I've had in 2023. We're helping more people than we have in previous years, and I mean it's just a great time. I think this is the golden age of financial advice right now.
Okay. This is a question that I think all advisors want to know the answer to, but I think this is a question more important that clients and prospects need to hear from someone like yourself. What holds a prospect back from working with a financial advisor, from contacting someone like yourself?
I think there's a lot of head trash, right? I think in many cases it's embarrassment or shame because they think there's a gap from where they are versus where they should be. And honestly, a lot of times that's not based in reality. A lot of times people are in a much better financial situation than they actually think they are, but they might be comparing themselves to their neighbor because maybe they have a little bit nicer house or nicer cars or their kids go to private schools, but they don't know what the neighbor's balance sheet actually looks like. So they're comparing their worldview to the neighbor's outside, right? Only what they see on the outside. So I think that's the number one thing is this sort of head trash around, hey, I'm not as good as I should be. I'm not where I need to be. And then most of the time, there just has to be some sort of pain point or catalyst, right? Nobody generally just wakes up with everything going great in their life and says, you know what? I really could use a financial planner in my life. That just doesn't happen. There has to be a pain point, some sort of catalyst for like, man, I can't do this on my own. I'm not getting the answers that I need. I need help.
Do you find that it has to be something specifically, you say pain point, like painful or a catalyst that triggers it, or could it be something as innocuous as a reminder that shit, yeah, I need to get my ducks in a row here?
I think it could be. I mean, I think it's helpful if there's some sort of, real life experience or somebody that they know has gone through something. And then, at the same time, maybe they're seeing some of my content on LinkedIn and it's that constant reminder. And then you just kind of, it's a kind of a bad phrase to say it this way, but you wear them down over time. They're like, you know what, I really do need to get my estate planning completed. There's no reason to put it off.
Do you actually hear the feedback that you shared there? Like when folks come to you guys, that it's like, we just felt like we weren't ready. We maybe we felt a little bit of the shame. Like, does that actually come up?
All the time, all the time. And, a recent conversation, I think 2 times last week where the client actually said, or the prospect actually said, even though that we told them like, hey, you're exactly who we work with, like you're our people. That was still kind of that, am I a good fit? Yeah, you're a great fit. You're who we help. You're in a great spot. We're going to turn an A into an A plus. You're going to be okay. So there's that's always there for most people, is that they don't think they're good enough. They don't think they have enough. They're concerned that they're in the right place with the right advisor. And you kind of just have to make them feel safe and secure. And over time, they do start to open up.
So specific to you guys, talk to me a little bit about who that person is, that avatar. I mean, we throw out the term prospect, right, and client. Like, as far as Know My Plan and Nic Nielsen and your team, who specifically are you guys looking to work with? Who is an ideal client for you?
I'm going to go one step further and break it into two different people if I can. Well, on average, it's 38 to 42. What we're really seeing is some sort of like divergence from that. We're seeing the 50-year-old with $1 million who just wants to really hone in on, am I on track? Do I have enough? What do I need to do differently? I want to finish the race strong. And then I think you have the 34-year-old executive who is making the 250, 300, $4,000 a year, who wants to become that 50-year-old to finish strong. So I kind of see it, there's like two different layers underneath Know My Plan on really who we're helping.
So as I think that through, it feels like the whole process kind of the idea of the process probably overwhelms people. And you said maybe embarrassment or the lack of confidence that they're in a good enough place to hire a financial advisor might hold people back. I wonder if some of the if another layer to that, and you speak to this, you tell me, I don't know, is this whole thing is just overwhelming. I'm going to get on with my week, and then weeks pile up and nothing happens.
There's a lot of layers to, and it's not as simple as changing the channel and going from Netflix to Disney Plus, right? That doesn't take a lot of effort to change the channel on the television. This takes some self-reflection in many cases. And sometimes people aren't always ready for that. Sometimes there's some anxiety if they are currently working with a financial advisor of what it looks like to break up with that financial advisor. We've had a couple of situations recently where, these were very large relationships and they had trusted relationships with their current advisor, but over two cases, a 10 and 15-year period, the annualized rates of return were under 2%. And they felt like they gave their advisor time, they trusted the person, they liked the person, but they couldn't continue to go down that path. And there was a lot of anxiety about really breaking up with a friend.
Yeah. Like that has to be a weight lifted off their shoulders after they finally say, here, take this. Like I can't be in charge of this anymore. Either the number has grown to a point that I'm scared of screwing it up, or I got to grow the number to a bigger number. Like I imagine there's just this weight lifted off these folks' shoulders.
Yeah, we had a relationship, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. It was a sister brought in her sister, and our client, the older sister, had teed it up basically as, my sister's in a terrible financial situation. She's had a really tough time. Would you be willing to meet with her? We always say, if there's somebody important to you, they're important to us. We would be glad to sit down with your sister and do whatever we can to help, get her on a path. And immediately she came in and you could feel the anxiety in the air. She was nervous. And, Jeff just said, hey, take a deep breath, relax. This is a safe space. Sometimes we jokingly refer it to, you're in the tree of trust. And her entire personality changed. And the person that walked in was a different person than the person who left. Her body was different. She was smiling from ear to ear. And in fact, she wasn't in a dire financial situation. She was actually in a really good spot. There was just some things within her own financial plan that were misunderstood. And pensions are complicated. Social Security is complicated. And just when and that wasn't her zone of genius. And once she understood what some of these things meant and how they applied to her, you know, get off Google, figure out how they apply to you, different person. And I have no doubt that she walked out of there and her life was much better because of the hour that we spent together.
That's huge. And like, that's the one thing that we've talked in the past that I just feel like more people need to hear because I feel like there's probably, I mean, I can't even quantify the number. There's thousands of folks out there between that 38 to 52 that just need to give this right to someone else and let them handle it. And either they're just not aware that there's a group out there like yourselves or groups out there like yourselves, or they're just being stubborn. And it's an interesting conversation psychologically, frankly.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think it's more expensive than it actually is. They don't understand the value. And I think sometimes, for someone who hasn't worked with a financial advisor before, going to a website and clicking on a fee schedule, it can be a little bit overwhelming. And they're like, well, how could I ever derive that type of value from working with someone? And sometimes you just have to take the leap of faith to go through the process and experience. And there's been plenty of studies that have been done that people who do have a financial advisor, they have more money than people who don't, right? They have less stress in retirement than people who don't. This isn't necessarily about getting Scrooge McDuck rich. It's about being able to fund your dreams, goals, aspirations, and live the life that you want to live. And hopefully do that with a little bit less stress. And you get to do a few more fun things and cross off a few more items on that bucket list.
It's funny how you worded that. I think you stayed away from, or you didn't focus in as much on the real alpha there. I think folks think the alpha, right, is how many basis points am I outperforming the market by, or how much more money are you going to add to my account? I think what's real is the stress level. It's Friday at 10 a.m. and some news dropped. I'm a DIYer. I don't really want to have to be sitting there figuring this out while my family's packing for vacation right now. That's why I hired you. You guys do it, right?
Yeah, and most things in life are better when they're automated or when you have a coach. And what they actually do to hopefully keep them from making the big mistake. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, like, hey, Corey, this is where you're at. This is where you want to go. These are the two or three things that you need to do consistently every month to get there.
If you could put a title on it, what's the biggest mistake, just as you rack your brain that you see your ideal prospects making ahead of hiring you guys?
There's a lot of things that could go bad with them. Sometimes with the more complicated incentive stock options, they exercise them um, in a manner that creates the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. It's neither alternative nor minimum. It's mandatory and maximum, and it's something that very few people on earth even understand, and that puts them in a really, really painful position. And then, you know, trying to figure out how these stock options fit into your overall plan. The average person who doesn't do this every day just doesn't understand it. They don't get it. And a lot of times these stock options, which could be used to fund a lot of their dreams, goals, aspirations, they just get cashed out, get thrown into the checking account, and they just get used for, a random credit card bill or a student loan payment. It's just an incredible asset, and there's not a lot of intentionality that goes into figuring out what to do because it's complex and nobody teaches you these things in school, and the companies aren't doing a great job of educating their employees on what your options are with the options. They're afraid to do anything, so they just accumulate the stock, don't do anything with it, and then before you know it, they got 90% of their net worth tied into a company stock. Maybe it's great, maybe it's not, but you already have 100% of your paycheck tied to that company. Now you got 80, 90% of your liquid net worth tied to the company. And the line that I give people is individual stocks go to zero. Happens all the time. Diversified portfolios do not. And, we've had several situations where people have lost 90+% in their employer stock. And it's very rare for a company to go down 60, 70% and actually rebound to get back to previous new highs. Yes, it's happened with Amazon and Netflix and Google, but so those are some of the best, well capitalized companies in the history of mankind. This doesn't happen to the random company very often. When it goes down 60, 80, 90%, it's trying to tell you something. And generally, what it's telling you is this company is going to zero.
That's funny. It's not funny, but it is because I think we use these just because they're recent, right? Like we use the fangs as proxies to tell stories and use as examples. And probably because again, they're companies that have been birthed in the last 25 years. But to your point, they're generational businesses that won't likely happen again until there's another wave of whatever it is. And human, right? This is like the car companies in the 30s, you know.
Yeah, your small cap biotech or medical device sales company is not capitalized the way that Meta and Google and Netflix are. Like when your small cap company generally loses 60 to 90%, it is telling you something loud and clear. Could it come back? Sure, of course it can. Could it reach new highs? Sure. But the odds are stacked against you. And that's why, in a perfect world, you never have more than 10% of your liquid net worth allocated, to any stock, but certainly your employer stock. And heaven forbid it would go higher than 20%. But I mean, those are sort of those irreversible moments that if you mess up, you generally don't get a second chance at it.
We've covered a little bit of the prospect client side. I want to segue to the industry FA side, get your opinions on some of that. I think it helps the audience. I think it adds some valuable color for who you guys are and what you do at a high level.
Sometimes you can think that, the financial advice industry is what you see on social media, whether it be LinkedIn or Twitter, but it's much bigger than that. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of great advisors throughout the country who don't do anything on social. Maybe it's because their company won't let them. Maybe it's because they already have incredible established practices, maybe within a bank or a wirehouse where they don't need to. And honestly, if something were to happen to Jeff and I and my wife and children survived us, like the advisor that I trust the most on earth is inside of a bank program and doesn't even have a LinkedIn profile, and he's literally as good of a financial advisor that you could meet anywhere in the world. And I think there's incredible advisors. And I think sometimes the message of who we are as financial advisors, I think, gets watered down a little bit by what is seen on social. And I think in many cases, a lot of the people who are the loudest on social really probably aren't the best advisors or have the best businesses, but they have more time to spend on social.
Where do you see the industry headed? You mentioned advisory services, right?
Yeah. I think the industry it's in a great spot. There's a lot of weird, quirky rules that happen. I don't know that there's really any momentum between the various groups to make any of those things easier. But the great advisors will always find clients, right? Because if nothing else, their clients are going to refer people when the opportunity presents itself. When there are trusted professional alliances, whether it's CPAs or estate planning attorneys or mortgage loan officers, when they might get asked the question, hey, who would be a good financial advisor to work with, or the great advisors get those referrals more often than not, or maybe it's the great marketers. But I think there will always be a need for financial advice. I'm not concerned about AI taking over. I'm not concerned about the robo advisors. I mean, I think the future for advice is very bright. I think there continues to be less and less value on investment management. That I think that's where the commoditization takes place, and frankly, I think that's probably a good thing.
scratch at that a little bit. Investment management, you're talking fund companies, potentially insurance companies, the wholesale side of the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think prices are getting driven down really in the investment management space, right? You see expense ratios going down, whether it's on ETFs or mutual funds. You see less of the brokerage business with commissions. You see more advisory share classes. So, I mean, I think those are really, really good things for consumers. At this point in the game, with the amount of tools and resources that are at the disposal for all financial advisors for basically nothing, there's really no excuse not to build a well diversified portfolio. That's table stakes. The difference is who can actually put good planning around it, who can help connect the dots for people in a meaningful way where they're actually going to execute on the ideas that you give them, right? A financial plan means nothing if you give something to someone that's nothing more than the King James Bible of a paperweight, right? You have to take those ideas and get them implemented. That's where the magic of planning happens. The investments, I mean, that's like the smallest part of the whole process. I mean, there's some cool things that can happen with investment management. I love geeking out on some of that stuff, but it's really getting the people to execute is what matters.
You really just nailed that, and I just want to make sure everyone kind of gets that point because you said so many things there. Commoditized, the commoditization of the investment management business. You said AI is not going to take away the value you guys offer, which I couldn't agree with more. I actually think AI coming will enhance what you're able to do at a greater scale because it'll be able to free up time for some of the mundane tasks that take up your time. And I think actually, I truly believe this. I think folks are going to want more intimate relationships with the people they work with because the increase in automation and robotics and all those things that will come, which is great. But I think it will make us want a tighter relationship with the humans we want to have tight relationships with, which makes your business that much more valuable. And then I think about how you put a plan together, right? You deliver that one page plan versus Joe Schmo delivering that one page plan. That client and user experience is way different for each of those people. And I think that's where the value is. And I think that's what you're saying. And I love hearing that. It'll be interesting to see how the investment management world handles this because, you know, XYZ fund from you, if let's pretend you're a wholesaler, and XYZ fund from John Smith, doesn't matter how it's delivered because it is a product, right? So I think about that stuff a lot.
Yeah, and I don't meet with many wholesalers. I meet with a few that are friends, but in client interactions, we don't talk about the underlying investments. We talk about asset classes at large. We talk about how much we need in cash, stocks, fixed income, but it's very rare that we go beyond that waterline, so to speak, and start diving into, hey, these are the four ETFs that we own in the equity space. This is how we ladder your fixed income portfolio, or these are the 25 individual stocks that we have. We very rarely go to that level because my personal opinion is it's not important. We just need to get the asset class return. And the goal is not to outperform the S&P 500. The goal is to fund the life that you want, right? There's a lot of people, maybe their portfolio is 1% a year better than us, but they might fall incredibly short of plan because they don't know how to fund it or they don't know what accounts they need to fund, right? So we're going beyond just building the best portfolio, and we don't claim that we do. We think it's good or good enough. Um, this is the only industry on earth where an average portfolio is exceptional by any metric because it's probably going to outperform 97% of your neighbors. We want to tell people exactly what you need to contribute every single month, what accounts those dollars need to go into, and then finally what those underlying investments are going to be, which we handle. We don't need to bog down people with that. But the most important thing is that someone walks away and has a very clear understanding of what the next steps are. And more importantly, what do I need to do between today and the day that I say that I want to be financially independent? What are those things that we need to do? This is why planning is greater than a plan, is because the moment you put a plan in place, it's wrong. You just hope that it's less wrong by having a plan than by not having a plan at all, because uh, projections on rate of return are going to be wrong. Projections on inflation are going to be wrong. Projections on what your income is going to be year over year is going to be wrong. So you have to constantly make small course corrections to end up in the right place.
As your careers progressed, were there moments, there had to be, what were the moments like when you thought, this is what I think my career is going to look like? And from the at the bank, like what did you think it was going to be? And then when you and Jeff left the bank and you launched KMP, what did you think, however many years ago that was, 5, 7 years ago, what did you think KMP would turn into? And then what do you think now when you sit here in late 2023 and say, boy, this is where I think this thing's going? Like, I'd love to know where you thought it was going, where it went, and how those progressions have been for you professionally.
That's a great question. So I've been doing this close to 20 years now. So I initially got securities license back in 2006. And, I think one of the differences for me compared to most young people is I was very blessed to be in a bank program that was as progressive as it was, that I had people around me that poured into me and loved on me. And the process over the past 20 years, shockingly, really hasn't changed. Um, I had great, great mentors at the beginning, and they were people who drew pictures and talked to people in very plain language that avoided investment jargon. And I got to work with like 3, 4, 5 amazing bank financial advisors who are as good as any financial advisors in the world today. And what I did is I essentially took what I thought were the best practices from each one of those people and kind of put my own little spin on it to create what is our one-page plan today. When we left the bank, I don't think that we had like a great business plan, or we didn't really even talk about like our view for the future. What we knew is that our process would work.
But like even pausing before you even left the bank, as a financial advisor at the bank, 30-year-old Nic, 28-year-old Nic, what did you think like your career would be?
Um, and I think, yeah, so that's an interesting question. And I think a lot of it, most financial advisors would talk about like money and things like that. Growing up, both of my parents were teachers, and they probably never had a year where they made over $50,000, maybe one or two. Um, and so I thought we were rich growing up because my parents were at all of my sporting events, because I always had new cleats or a new bat for the season. I just assumed we were the wealthiest family around. Um, so money was never like a motivator for me. I it's not wasn't that big of a deal. What ultimately, the frustrations of the bank, where we spent so much of our time away from relationships with our clients and prospects. There was so much noise and energy that pulled us away from kind of that one-page plan, ongoing planning, helping people to get from A to B in the most optimal way. It was just a huge energy suck. And the better you are at the bank, the more time is demanded of you to do those certain things. And that was really the thing that drove us out of the bank.